I'm Linda Lurch. Stay tuned for On the Air with Atro, a program brought to you by the Abington Township Rockledge Borough Republican Organization. Coming up next on Channel 190.
Hi, I'm Kevin Sepka. Welcome to On the Air with Atro, a program brought to you by the Abington Township Rockledge Borough Republican Organization. Our guest today is Dee Adcock, who is running for the congressional seat currently held by Allison Schwartz, the 13th congressional seat in Pennsylvania. Dee, welcome.
Hey, great to be with you, Kevin.
Good to see you again. Dee, tell us a little bit about your background and how that fits in with what you're trying to do in running this race.
Well, I grew up in Huntington Valley. I married my wife from Rockledge, and we've raised our family in Abington. So we're a totally 13th Congressional District family. We have 3 children and been growing a business there in Huntington Valley, our pool business, from a small retail store to one of the larger independent distributors in the country. As a small businessman, I know what it is to make a business work, to hire people, to sign the front side of a paycheck, and to provide the benefits that people need. I also work with lots of small businessmen. That's all I sell to, so I know what it's like. And it's getting to be pretty tough out there time to time. What brought you to your ultimate decision to run for Congress? Well, early on, when I first started thinking about it was mostly because I was looking at watching the TV at night, watching the news shows, and like many Americans, becoming more and more frustrated. Eventually, after a number of nights, my wife finally turned to me and said, "Dee, either do something about it or turn the TV off." I said, "Well, I just might." And I'm sitting here tonight. I'm Dee Adcock, and I'm running for Congress. What are some of the major issues that you saw that really bothered you the most, Dee? Well, like many other Americans, I mean, the $1.3, $1.5 trillion deficit year after year. I know that we can't sustain this as a country. We have to turn back to more fiscally sound policies, to limited spending, limited taxation, and moving toward a balanced budget, just as we did in the 90s. This is the only thing that will save the America that we knew as we were growing up, for our children and for our grandchildren. There had obviously been a lot of give and take, as you know, on the Obama health care bill, now called Obamacare. What do you think of the legislation in its present form and how it had passed? Well, certainly how it passed was anything but democratic. We know that 70% of the American people didn't want it to pass. I was one of them, and I even wrote my representative, Allison Schwartz, to let her know that that's how I felt about it. It didn't do what it set out to do. It's not controlling costs. There was nothing in there to address the legal fees, the malpractice. There was nothing there to increase supply of doctors. All we've done is perhaps increased the number of people that are going to be covering. We decreased what doctors will be getting paid from Medicare and other portions of it. So the net of it is we're going to end up with poorer care and longer waits. Mm-hmm. The rest of the 2,400-page bill, which will be translated into, who knows, 12,000 or 24,000 pages of regulations. As a businessman, as a consumer, we just don't know what's in there, and there's new revelations every day. The 1099s that businesses have to issue for anyone over $600 is just going to be a burden. It's going to be a burden on business. It's going to be a burden on government. They're going to be swamped with 1099s and not know what to do with them. Precisely. We can go on and probably spend an hour just on this. Sure. Given the fact that Allison Schwartz, who is your opponent for this seat, has held that seat since 2004, what do you think some of the major reasons are that she ought to be replaced? Well, she ought to be replaced because, as I see it, A, she doesn't represent the people of this district. This isn't San Francisco. And, I mean, Representative Schwartz is Nancy Pelosi East. She could be Nancy Pelosi's clone. There's no one with a more liberal voting record in my mind than Allison Schwartz.
Obviously, since the last time we spoke, you've spent a great deal of time on the campaign trail, talking with people, speaking at groups and so forth. What are some of the things that you're hearing from those people that you've been talking to?
Frustration. Frustration with the economy, frustration with the lack of jobs. And this is coming from various and sundry people. I mean, there's Republicans, there's Tea Party activists, certainly independents and libertarians and disgruntled Democrats. I've talked to folks from unions. Hey, that massive stimulus bill didn't do anything for them. We don't have new construction going on. And hopefully we've found out that government jobs are not real jobs. They're just another burden on our society. Real jobs are generated in the private sector. And if we're going to get the economy going and growing again, we need to reinvest in the private sector and stop spending all this money in the public sector. We can't spend our way to prosperity.
Dee, if elected to this congressional position, what would be the top 2 or 3 things that you might take a look at as being a priority for Dee Adcock in Congress?
Well, as I said, I'm in favor of limited government, limited spending, limited taxation, and getting to that balanced budget. Therefore, we're going to have to take a look at the budget itself, of cutting back spending, earmarks, $16 billion, ethanol subsidies, that's good for $5 billion, agricultural subsidies, $10, $15 billion, and corporate welfare. It doesn't help real business, small businesses out at all, but that's good for $90 billion. We ought to cut at least half of that. That's a start. We need to roll back, move back to a budget levels that we had back in 2006, 2008, and then grow government slightly less than the pace of inflation. That way we can move toward that balanced budget that I talk about.
Would there be any focus on particular committee assignments as such? Finance or appropriations?
Well, certainly Budget Committee is my background in economics and running a small business, in working with charities. I'm working with budgets all the time and controlling spending and making them work. As you know, Kevin, the United States of America doesn't need a budget anymore, apparently, according to the Democratic majority. Representative Schwartz is on the Budget Committee, Vice Chair, with control of both houses plus the executive branch, yet we don't have a budget. Guess you can't be held accountable if there's nothing to be held accountable to.
Yeah, that was one of the most astounding things that obviously occurred, is that Congress adjourned this election season without having acted on the tax policies that were talked about, nor a budget. What would you have done differently than Representative Schwartz did?
Well, I consider it totally irresponsible to have adjourned without deciding what you're going to pay for taxes, what I'm going to pay for taxes, and what small businessmen across the country are going to be paying for their taxes. It was simple, it was under their control, and they didn't do it. They should probably all be fired. If they worked for me, they would be.
We'll be right back after these messages.
On November 2nd, you have a chance to change what's going on in Washington, a chance to pick a candidate for Congress who will say no to excess government spending and yes to job creation. Dee Adcock is an entrepreneur, independent businessman, and a lifelong resident of the area. He believes in fiscal responsibility, limited government, job creation, and real affordable health care reform, and has the Republican Party endorsement. Vote for Dee Adcock for U.S. Congress on November 2nd.
I'm Dee Adcock, and I approved this message.
I'm Tom Bogar, candidate for state representative in the Abington and Upper Dublin District. The most important issues facing Pennsylvania today are keeping and creating jobs, reducing taxes, controlling runaway spending, and eliminating corporate welfare and pork barrel projects without accounting gimmicks, shell games, or new debt. I will fight to make state government live within its means by making the same kinds of tough choices our families make by cutting unnecessary spending without raising taxes. I'm Tom Bogar, and I approve this message.
Hi, I'm Kevin Supka. Welcome to On the Air with Atro. Our guest for this segment is Tom Bogar, who is running for the state representative position in the 153rd District, currently held by Josh Shapiro.
Hey,
Tom, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Tom, you've been knocking on doors, going through neighborhoods, speaking with constituents, meeting with people. Some of the major issues that seem to come out on the state level are things that Josh Shapiro has been involved in the past. Things like having an effective office, the cell phone bill, the $250 million in WHAM money, and so forth. Can you give us a sense of how you would be approaching these various issues, since obviously 2010 is a very different time legislatively?
Sure, Kevin. Constituent services is just one part of the office, one part of the job. Another part of the job, and very important, especially in these difficult times, is what is done and how you're voting in Harrisburg. And to address some of the issues you raised, one, you raised the cell phone bill, and this seems to be Josh Shapiro's key legislation. He's been trying to pass this for 5 years, and for some reason, somehow, it still hasn't been able to get passed. While other states like New York has had this bill or this law on the books for over 11 years. I know this because after 9/11, I was mobilized to Fort Drum with the 10th Mountain Division. They had the bill, they had the law on the books at that point. So I guess that tells you what kind of a legislator Josh Shapiro is in Harrisburg and how effective or non-effective he really is if it's taken 5 years to get to this point. But the reality is the state is facing some serious budget issues, a real budget crisis. In fact, right now, our Democratic Auditor General, Jack Wagner, says next year we are facing up to a $5 billion hole. $5 billion with a B, a Bravo, out of a $28 billion budget. That's a lot of money. On top of that, the following year, we're facing another $5 to $6 billion budget crunch based on a pension crisis. That's $10 billion in the next 2 years that somehow has to be made up or cut. Josh Shapiro's answer is going to be to raise more taxes. In fact, he has done so in the most recent Marcellus Shale vote. So.
It's interesting you bring that up. Let's talk about that for a minute, because the Marcellus Shale seems to be a real economic positive for the state of Pennsylvania. And maybe you can share your thoughts on how you would see the state of Pennsylvania utilizing that as the resource that it is.
Okay, look, frankly, there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of things, misconceptions, and wrong information that's out there that you hear depending on how people vote. And a lot of the information is in open sources, but there are other states like Texas that has a gas severance, and there's this gas, without getting all the details, in the middle part of the state, we have these largest gas reserves in the country. Unfortunately, a lot of the gas is very difficult to get to. Our state, in addition to taxing the income on the gas profits, they also want to tax the severance, which is based on when the gas is extracted from the ground, and before it's sold, it's going to be taxed a first time. When it's sold to the consumer, it will be taxed a second time, double tax, okay? Now, the problem with the taxes, the first proposal was to tax it at a rate that is comparable with other states. However, those other states that have the severance tax have lower business taxes to offset it. Pennsylvania has no plans, as far as I know, I've heard, and I don't think they ever will, lower our business taxes, because we do have one of the highest business tax rates in the country. So now we're going to have this plus the oil or the gas tax on top of that. Now, they'll tell you, and I've heard Josh Shapiro say this as well, that the tax, the severance tax, will be used to offset the cost to the environment or the damage to the environment and to the roads. Well, someone's got to pay for that. Well, the reality